Basketball is one of the most popular and fastest growing sports in the world. In recent years, the sport has been growing at an incredible rate internationally, and overall interest in the NBA has been at an all-time high. So why are some people calling for a change to a fundamental part of the league's organization? In recent years, some fans have begun to feel disgruntled at a certain aspect of the way the league is formatted. This displeasure comes to the idea of conferences in the NBA, something that fans of the league are beginning to mark as an outdated concept that is simply a relic from the past. While the concept of conferences worked fine in the past, as the league continues to grow, they are becoming more and more obsolete. For those who are unaware of how the NBA is formatted, the league is split into two conferences, the East and the West, each containing 15 teams. At the end of the season, 8 teams from each conference with the best records advance to the playoffs, while the rest are eliminated and entered into the draft lottery. The NBA has used this two-conference format for the majority of its history, and it has always worked quite smoothly. While this format is easy to understand and serves its purpose quite well, conferences were originally introduced during the 1946 season as a way to make travel easier for visiting teams. See, the way schedules are made up, during the 82-game season, teams will play each team from their own conference 3 times, and teams from the opposing conference twice. Schedules were originally created in this way to put less stress on the players mentally and physically. By playing teams within your own conference and more than those out of conference, it makes it so that there is significantly less travel for the players and teams to make between games. However, in the modern NBA, the amount of travel a team has to make during the season is as irrelevant as ever. Back in the day, teams didn't have their own private jets or fancy buses. Instead, they were often forced to take public transportation, or, if they were lucky, they'd be able to sit and coach on a regular plane. Nowadays, teams and players get to travel in style, oftentimes having their own private jets for players, with all sorts of accommodations on board, making the amount of travel the players have to do irrelevant and eliminating one of the main reasons conferences were first put into place. Now that we have an understanding of why conferences are becoming more and more obsolete by the day, let me explain the flaws that have been becoming more and more obvious in recent years. Since the 1999 season, the West has been the far superior conference in terms of the amount of talent and overall record of their teams. It is even a close race between the two, as the West has come out victorious in the All-Star games 12 times since then, compared to the East's measly 6 wins in comparison. Also, Western Conference teams have won the NBA championship a total of 14 times since 1999, compared to the East 7. Just by looking at these numbers, we can tell that the difference between the two isn't really close. The problem here isn't simply that the West seems to be producing the top teams, but that as a whole, the East is consistently less talented than the West from top to bottom. Last year, during the 2018-19 season, the 15 Western Conference teams combined for 642 wins, while the same amount of teams from the East combined for a total of 568. A similar story can be seen every single season since 2004, with the exception of the 2012 season. It is not uncommon for an 8th seed in the West to have a better record than a 5th or even 4th seed in the East. This issue becomes even more concerning when you realize how many teams from the West would have made it to the playoffs had they been in the East, simply because there are so few real contending teams in that conference. For instance, last season the Los Angeles Clippers were the last team to clinch a playoff seed in the West with a record of 48-34, while the last seed in the East had a record of 41-41. Had the Clippers been a part of the Eastern Conference, they would have been the 5th seed, and instead of playing the Warriors in the first round, one of the greatest teams of all time, they would have been matched against a struggling Celtics team, who they likely could have beaten. There are so many instances like this in the league, and even some examples where teams from the West that didn't even make the playoffs would have been a high seed in the East. In 2015, there were 4 teams in the West that missed the playoffs, who had they been in the East would have made the playoffs. These feats are even more remarkable when you realize that teams from the West are even playing a harder schedule during the regular season, since they have more interconference matchups against other strong Western franchises. So why is there such a discrepancy between the two sides of the league? Is it simply bad luck for the East, or is there something greater at play here? One of the only factors that could impact this lopsidedness is the quality of big market teams in each conference. The amount of big market teams between the two is about even, but the actual success of these teams is what makes a big difference. The West's top 3 most valuable franchises, according to Bleacher Report, are the Lakers, Warriors, and Rockets, 3 of the best and most consistently successful teams in the NBA. The Rockets and of course the Warriors both enjoyed lots of success in the 2010s, and the Lakers seem to be the championship favorites this year after adding Anthony Davis and LeBron James over the past 2 years. Now, looking at the Eastern Conference, you'd expect their largest market franchises to be just as successful and well-run, right? Well, not exactly. The 3 most valuable Eastern Conference teams this season are the Knicks, Bulls, and Nets. These 3 teams combined a record of 1,000 52, and 1,360 since 2010. Take the Bulls out of that equation, who are simply a mediocre team, and the two New York teams have a combined record of 624 and 984. Yikes. In my research, it seems that the biggest problem with the East is that their large market teams, franchises which free agents might actually be interested in signing in, are usually viewed as being dysfunctional and poorly run organizations. Just look at the New York Knicks, the most valuable franchise in the entire league, but at the same time, also the biggest dumpster fire in the whole association. This team is literally a meme in the NBA community, despite it being so popular. The same could be said for the Bulls, and until recent years, the Nets were simply a middle-of-the-line team in the NBA. If the top teams in your conference can't lure in free agents because they're simply poorly run franchises, then the result of that is what we have now, a lopsided NBA with few free agent destinations in the East. Only a couple marquee free agent stars have come to the East from the West over the past few seasons. In fact, there have only been 2 All-Stars in the past 3 years to move from the West and sign with an Eastern Conference team, these being Kevin Durant and Gordon Hayward, and who knows how either of them will turn out, as they both have been plagued by injuries over the past couple years. So besides having a lopsided league, what makes this such a concern that some feel conferences should be eliminated altogether? Well, in the current league format, teams' records and playoff seeding are not a true representation of who are the best teams in the league. As we've discussed before, the West is a much deeper conference, meaning some teams over there will have a lower seed than they deserve, and teams in the East will sometimes have a much higher seed in their conference, even if sometimes they shouldn't be in the playoffs at all. Oftentimes, there are Western Conference teams who are clearly much better than some playoff teams in the East, but since it is so competitive, their season ends after 82 games, and the John Wallace Wizards end up making the playoffs instead of the Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns-led Timberwolves. This is a problem for the NBA itself as well. Fans want to see the best talent on the court at all times, and it's such a star-driven league. If there is a matchup that fans don't view as being very exciting, they simply won't watch. If the league wants to draw in more viewership, it would be in their best interest to format the league in such a way that the top teams and talent will always be in the playoffs. Another problem that arises from the unbalanced landscape of the league comes during the All-Star selection process. One of the greatest accomplishments a player can achieve in the NBA is being named to one of the All-Star teams. However, due to the unbalanced star power in the league over the past few seasons, many players from the West who probably deserve to make one of the All-Star rosters are being snubbed from the selections. In 2019, big-name players such as DeMar DeRozan, Luka Doncic, Donovan Mitchell, and Rudy Gobert all watched the All-Star game from their couches at home, while Chris Middleton and Kyle Lowry were both drafted to Team Giannis. While I don't want to discount the season that Chris Middleton and Kyle Lowry both had last season, it is clear to me and most other NBA fans that if we were to rank the previous 6 players mentioned, the 2 who actually made the All-Star game would be the 2 lowest ranked on that list. So why were they the ones who made the All-Star team? Well, you probably guessed it. Middleton and Lowry both played in the far less star-studded Eastern Conference. The final problem that arises from having unbalanced conferences in the NBA is the unfair advantage that the top teams in the East get from having an easier schedule. Every season, the West is an absolute battle. Nobody ever knows how the seeding will play out at the end of the season or who will even make the playoffs. Teams have to give it their absolute best each and every night, because if they just let a few games slip through their fingers, that could be the difference between playing the Warriors in the first round or the 4th seed Rockets. The margins in the West really are that small. Last season, if the 8th seed Clippers won just 2 more games, instead of matching up with the seemingly unstoppable Warriors first round, they would have clinched the 5th seed and been against the inconsistent Rockets. For a team that was actually able to steal 2 games from the Warriors without having a single All-Star, the Clippers would have actually had a good chance to take down the Rockets in that series and advance to the conference semifinals. On the other hand, the East is far more predictable. Usually before the season starts, it is easy to point out who will make the playoffs and be the top seeds. Nailing down exactly where each team will fall in the standings might be a little more difficult, but I could have told you that the top 4 seeds in the East last year would have been the Raptors, Celtics, Bucks, and 76ers before the season even started. And guess what? That's exactly who the top 4 teams were. It seems like the pattern is followed every single season, with the best teams in the East coasting to their top spots, while those in the West go to war every night in the hope of climbing as far as they possibly can up the rankings. It's not like the bottom of the East is even that close of a race like it is in the West. The difference between the 8th and 5th seed in the East is 8 games. In the West, that difference is just 2. So, now that we understand the entire scope of the problem, the question still remains: how do we balance the NBA? Well, in my opinion, there is one very simple answer to this question: eliminate conferences as a whole from the league. Now, while this may sound like a radical idea, it seems to me like the most practical and simple option for making the playoffs as fair as possible. In the modern NBA, the only use that the league still has for the two separate conferences is to seed the playoffs. Now that fans, players, and executives have realized that this may not be the best method for organizing them, I don't think that this is too far-fetched to simply eliminate them. So if there are no conferences, how will playoffs now work in the league? While there are many ways which the league could choose to format the playoffs, I think that the best option is also the most simple one. Have all 30 teams in one big pool, and the 16 teams with the best records will make the playoffs. The 1 seed plays a 16th seed, 2 plays a 15th, 3rd seed plays the 14th, so on and so forth. Other people may recommend seeding the playoffs based on division, but that could lead to some of the same problems that occur with conferences, with one or more of the divisions being stacked and having some of the better teams not make the playoffs. With my new recommended format, there will no longer be any debate as to whether one team should have made the playoffs instead of another, or claims that certain teams from the East have a quote-unquote cakewalk to the finals. With this new format, literally everyone gets what they want. Fans get to see the best talent in the playoffs, the league will draw in better ratings from having better competition, and as a whole, the league will become a lot more fair and easier to understand.